everybody. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast, where we are still trying to figure out what what the heck happened last night at UFC 293. I'm Robert Winfrey. I'm your host, and we're gonna be trying to figure that out. Um, I got to do the intro spiel, or I'll forget to do it. So let me do this. Please interact with the product, like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review, whatever is applicable to your podcast platform of choice. That's all very helpful. Uh, Done any and all of that, please share your social media platform of choice or just people that you know that you think would enjoy the show. Point them in our direction. Deeply appreciate any and all the assistance you guys can give to the program in that respect. Uh, it means a lot to me. Let me apologize a little bit off the bat here. We're coming off of UFC 293, and one of the perils of doing this the immediate day after an event is sometimes it's difficult to figure out what you want to say about certain things or to really kind of dig into specifics of technical application, tactical decision making, the whole 9 yards there. Um, but and we had a weird. That's a good way to describe it. There was a thing, the main event in particular of 293, that a lot of us, I think, are still trying to wrap our heads around. And we're rewatching tape and we're trying to figure this out. Like, what happened and how did we get there? And I've been doing this the last couple of days with a fairly heavy heart. This year has kind of sucked, personally. Professionally, it's been a little up and down. Some good stuff, some bad stuff. That's the nature of professions. The podcast is doing, it's pretty static. It fluctuates a little bit, like most podcasts do, especially related to the cyclical nature of MMA, because sometimes you got time when people don't care about what's going on and you're less likely to listen to a podcast like this, and I get it. I do. So there's that. But yeah, personally, I may have mentioned this here, probably. Back in March, we had to put our the family dog down. She was, what, almost, could have been 14, 15, something like that. Could have been 16. She had just turned 16 because we got her when she was 4 and we had her for 12 years. Yeah, so that sucked. And then in that same vein, earlier this week, Thursday morning, the family cat passed away. He was 16, and we had him for 16 years. So that's been, a bit of a cloud over this, and again, it's just 2023 has sucked. Can we just say that out loud? We at a point where we can say that? I'm not saying every individual minute detail of everything about the year has been terrible. There's been good stuff. Dude, boxing's had a heck of a year. Boxing has given us a bunch of great fights. And and there's a decent chance we'll get the second fight between Spence and Crawford before the end of the year. Boxing's been on a roll, but man, movies have kind of sucked. See my Damn You Hollywood podcast if you're interested in my thoughts on that. And I don't just mean like box office returns being down, they are. But like the quality has not been good. TV's kind of been lousy, right? And you can find some stuff, but on the whole, it's the trajectory, man. It has been downward. Then, personal stuff that just kind of sucked. And you fight to find personal stuff that tries to offset that. And I've had some good things in my personal life this year as well, but on balance, it ain't great. It's just one of those years. So, you know, were I conspiracy inclined, and I'm not as a general rule, not in any sort of serious capacity, There is an election coming up, and it's so, stuff happening right before we get into an election cycle, especially a national one, because here in the United States, the presidential election will be in 2024. So naturally, some places are talking about a new COVID variant. There, I'm not. Look, man. Even if you're not conspiracy minded, and again, I'm not, lest to the government agent listening to this, I guarantee you, I've pinged something at this point in their random scouting of stuff on the internet. It just does seem to cycle up, doesn't it? Even if it is more like on the genuine, like coincidental track, it does seem to do that, doesn't it? So yeah, not a great year. But that's my preamble. Thank you for letting me mention that, and we're gonna try and figure this out. So let's talk about UFC 293. In your main event, improbably, Sean Strickland defeats Israel Adesanya unanimous decision 49-46 across the board to become the new UFC middleweight champion. You know, I I think I said it last week. I was not going to insult or completely dismiss Sean Strickland. I didn't see, again, a terribly viable path for him. But I've gone past the point with with MMA. Like I am beyond the point in MMA where I write people off if they get if they've proven to be near the title level. And whatever you want to say about middleweight as a division, and I will probably just refer you to Jack Slack's um, sardonic takes on MMA divisions above lightweight. I don't echo those entirely, but look, man, north of 155 at the moment is weird. Before we get into this fight in particular, and we'll talk about the division going forward, but dude, the welterweight kind of evaporated, didn't it? I mean, you got guys fighting there. You got a very good and deserving champion in Leon Edwards, but I mean, there was talk about Khamzat Chimaev being the next guy in that weight class. He's fighting up at middleweight now because weight cut's a bit too much, and fair play to you. Dude, he had a bad bout of COVID, man. If that weight cut became too much after that, I ain't holding that against him. But Shavkat Rakhmonov on the come up, but a lot of the top guys don't seem all that eager to fight him. And then he was supposed to fight Neil Magny, wasn't it? And then he had the minor injury. You got Bilal Muhammad, who should be your next title challenger, but nobody cares about. Fairly or unfairly, nobody cares. Colby Covington is probably going to get the next title shot, and he's been out of action for a while. And you can argue about how much his shtick might be wearing thin on people. Wouldn't surprise me one iota, just for the record. But like, the hype around welterweight, man, that is a division without momentum. Middleweight has players. I think if we're going to be fair here, like middleweight's weird, but it has a few players that are interesting that we need to see. Light heavyweight is a wasteland. There is no champion. Uh, that belt is cursed. I don't know what John Jones did to it, but it is cursed. Uh, and it's never been it hasn't been, light heavyweight hasn't been a genuinely deep and strong division in a long time anyway. Removing some of the exciting guys due to injury or whatnot, and the belt being vacant, like, there's nothing there. There's just nothing there. They're gonna have to rebuild that basically from scratch. And heavyweight is top heavy. If you really break down the top like 5 to 7 guys, there's some legitimate talent there. But it's heavyweight, so it's populated with a bunch of weirdness, and we'll talk about heavyweight in a minute. So just saying, if you're the kind of fan who only really cares about lightweight, featherweight, bantamweight, flyweight, you might be onto something. You might be onto something. That's all I'm saying. So I wasn't sure. Even if I was going to go on a flyer and pick Strickland, would not have done it. Would not have predicted it going the way that it did. Maybe I should have. I mentioned to one of my friends, Pat, who's been on the show years in the past. I mentioned to him that yeah, Strickland won. He said, "Let me guess, a lot of pressure and activity." You haven't watched him forever, man. How'd you get that right? And look, that's an oversimplification, but for the sake of just conversation, yeah, kind of that. And what made that possible, which is what we're going to talk about here. Um, yeah, Strickland, first guy to drop Adesanya in the UFC. Drops him with a right hand near the end of the first round. Pereira didn't drop him. Blachowicz didn't drop him. He's fought some guys that can thump, man. Robert Whittaker is no pushover. Gastelum hit him hard. Dude, Gastelum head kicked him. Remember that? Kelvin Gastelum hit him with a head kick, couldn't drop him. Strickland did. Just well-timed right hand. Kind of drops him against the fence. Um, I, w- I need to give Adesanya credit. He survived that, covered up, let the ref know, no, I'm good, disengaged, and then won the second round. Like the second round, things started going his way. Then things shifted in the third. I know some people who gave Adesanya the third. I didn't, but the argument is close enough that I'm not out here screaming about it. I don't think you don't lose credibility for that one. And then 4 and 5, like the best you can give Izzy is 2 rounds. 4 and 5 were pretty clearly Sean Strickland rounds. This was I've identified a couple of things that Strickland was able to do that I want to go over. But let me start with the result. Like the end result here is this was the lowest output this was the lowest output from Strickland in a 5 round fight. But it was by far and away the lowest output from Israel Adesanya in his UFC, I think in his UFC career. Let me find stats here. Have them, such as that. Yeah, total strikes. Adesanya landed just 94 of 271 thrown. He was connecting at only 34%. That's really low. He's not normally that low. Like he doesn't always have the highest output in the world, but even if he usually his accuracy is better than that. He just couldn't get going. By contrast, Strickland 137 of 259. Yeah, they only had significant strikes between the two of them, and it was mostly headhunting. I'm trying to figure out where they got 60. Where did they count body strikes? I'll have to double check. I mean, sorry, that's like how the people who do this count stuff, and I'm just curious about some of that, but doesn't matter. He didn't do a tremendous amount of body work in the, like the grand scheme of things. Oh no, I know where they're getting that. Okay, I'll have to slightly correct myself there. Not a lot of punches to the body, but Strickland made good use of a front kick off the lead leg to the body, usually off the lead leg. He was pretty good about poking Izzy with that one. That as a good disruptor, as a facilitator of range closing, all that good stuff. So he had that. I think Yeah. So if we look at like by round, Strickland outstruck numerically and I would argue qualitatively Izzy in rounds 1, 4, and 5. Round 3, Adesanya landed a whopping one more significant strike, and I would argue the quality of Strickland's strikes in that round were better. Round 2, Izzy pretty clearly, but that's the only round I gave him, and that's the only round the officials gave him to the official judge, to the best of my recollection. So where did we all get this wrong? Because I wasn't the only one out here saying I don't know how he does this. There were some people who had trained with him who's, and you wonder a little bit if that's some homerism. Like Chris Curtis is gonna pick him because they're buddies, and that's fine. Like I don't begrudge anybody that. There were a few people doing the who you might have thought, we're taking a flyer, because there's always some people who like to just buck trends. They always pick the underdog and like to pretend that they don't when they lose consistently, and then when they do win, claim, I don't know, clairvoyance, some degree or another. That's, but how did the vast majority of us get this wrong? Like, what happened here? And there's a few things. So I mentioned the front kick, good weapon from Sean. I think the thing that stuck out the most to me on rewatch, because I was able to watch this fight again before recording the show tonight. His footwork is still an issue, and I mean like the specifics of how he moves his feet. He brings them together a bit more than you'd like. He doesn't cross them as much, but he does some. These are no-nos as a general rule. But part of the reason you have to wonder about this, like, why? Okay? Why don't you cross your feet? Well, you don't cross your feet because in wrestling it's very easy to take someone down with their feet crossed. In boxing, it's easy to score knockdowns. Crossed feet, hard to balance. You just catch someone, you get knockdowns that way pretty easily. Or in wrestling, you get takedowns. These are all bad things. Okay. But can your footwork be different when you're far away from your opponent versus when you're close to them? Yes. You don't really want that habit to form. You'd rather drill it properly and again, learn the rules, learn the fundamentals, then learn when you can break them, right? That's the general sort of strategy there. So that's still a bit of a problem for him, but his cage craft, I think, was there because people have been throwing up, his fight with Alex Pereira, kind of being like, this guy's your champion now, or implying that the only Strickland stuff didn't work against Pereira because Pereira actually has cage awareness and you never saw him with his back to the fence. True. Didn't see Pereira with his back to the fence. Two things about that. One is stylistic. Pereira just doesn't like being there as a choice. And you can say it's generally bad optics to have your back on the fence, generally, but if you know what you're doing, it's just as valid to be there as in the middle of the cage. There's no there's no inherent value. A lot of the value of open space can be minimized depending on like who you're dealing with and the strategy they employ. And Tyron Woodley always fought with his back to the fence as a choice. Um, some guys, especially if you're worried about a takedown threat from your opponent, some guys have much better fence wrestling than they do open mat wrestling. Making it so any shot they take, you can get to that barrier very, very quickly is incredibly valid. But Pereira chooses not to be there, so he constantly turns in their fight, and Strickland is just kind of walking towards him. Strickland's cage craft in this fight was much better. Now, Izzy is a bit more predisposed to backing up and using that barrier, again, especially if he's worried about being taken down. Wrestling in open space versus wrestling against a wall or a cage, they're almost two different sports. Those are almost two different activities. Not a, it's Again, that's a bit of a stretch because a lot of the fundamental principles still apply. But and what this is some of the like you can watch someone like when Khabib was training at AKA, they'd have amateur wrestlers in straight amateur wrestling. It's not that Khabib's bad at it, but that's not his forte. He takes guys who are much better than him in pure wrestling. You introduce a wall barrier, the whole equation changes. So Izzy's not afraid of the fence in that respect. And he might have been trying to bait Strickland into getting overcommitting, going after a flurry so he can counter him. He does that a lot too. This is a stylistic choice. This has pitfalls, however, some of which are visible at different points. That's where he got into trouble with Pereira in their first MMA fight. That he was putting himself there a little bit too much, looking to either clinch or go for takedowns mostly, but he was putting himself there, and it limited some of his options, and Pereira finally was able to tag him. But it worked to his favor in their title rematch because he baited Pereira in. Pereira got a bit aggressive, thought he was more hurt than he was, got countered and put to sleep. Like trade-offs. Nothing is perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect style. There is no such thing as a perfect philosophy. None of it. So, Strickland just had someone who was a bit more accommodating of how he likes to move and pressure versus someone who's constantly just turning. But as a general rule, his cagecraft was better here. He didn't follow Adesanya as much. A little bit in the second, and that kind of got him. That's where things fell apart a little bit for him in that second. He got jabbed to the body. The body work from Adesanya in that second round, I was a little surprised he got away from it. It's one of the things that was helping keep Strickland off of him. He kept firing body kicks after that, but the problem with the round kick to the with the body, like going to the body serves many benefits. You can just try to fatigue your opponent. You can hurt them that way. Sap energy, sap strength, because a couple of good body shots and suddenly that pain radiates up towards your shoulders. So you've got all that, but one of the big benefits of good body work, especially to a very aggressive fighter, someone who's going to be kind of relentlessly coming forward, instead of looping your attacks, like the round kick, if you go straight, you're putting your arm and you're putting a structure, right? You got a pole, basically, between them and you keep them away. One of the big values of it. Second round, he was doing that. Third round, he got away from it. Now, some of this is a little bit how Strickland's performing. So I don't mean to say that Izzy just decided this wasn't good or he made a terrible decision. I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know what he was feeling. I was surprised to see him abandon that after it tended to serve him well in the second. So there was a bit of that. But Strickland's cage cutting, better. He wasn't getting reset on nearly as much as he has been in the past. Cannonier did a lot of that against him. Pereira did a lot of that against him. He seems to have worked on that aspect of his game. His jab was pretty good, but not as active as it has been in the past. Again, this was a low activity, low output fight for both guys. But Strickland's defense was this is kind of the big takeaway for me. The two big ones. Defense and distance. He was very well schooled for what Adesanya likes to throw. Anytime, I mean, you're never going to have 100% defense, right? He did get hit with a few calf kicks here and there, but as a general rule, he was either hollowing out to avoid them, hamstring curling to get out of the way, or he's checking them in some way. Not letting Adesanya establish them for rhythm, scoring purposes. There's a lot of benefits to that weapon, especially for Adesanya. He leans on it. Anytime Adesanya went southpaw, he was ready for the body kick. He was ready for the question mark kick. was great about taking away the jab. Um, how Strickland defends himself, like there's people who have done because he does a lot of Philly shell kind of stuff. There's a lot of people who did the, Floyd Mayweather thing, because Floyd Mayweather, probably the most famous recent practitioner to really employ that constantly. If you watch Floyd Mayweather's career, that was not his exclusive guard position, but he used it a lot. And I'm not going to make that comparison because if you watch Floyd, he's like that's how you teach it. I don't mean that he was textbook in every respect, but you want to teach people to do that. I don't think you want to teach people to defend the way Sean Strickland does as a general rule. Strickland's defense works for him most of the time for a couple of reasons. One is just the way MMA strikes, phrasing it that way, but punches in MMA tend to come at different enough angles from how they do in pure boxing that your defense can be your defensive position. It being more active is more beneficial. So one of the things you see in boxing, and I don't advocate this for boxing, but boxers will do a lot of covering, right? You don't see much of that in MMA because you don't have the same tools to cover the same real estate. It doesn't mean, fight with your hands down. It means good boxers do plenty of parrying and block in addition to just blocking. They parry, they deflect, they shoulder roll, right? Strickland does a fair bit of that, but he's adapted it for MMA and he's married it with a really solid feel for distance. Not perfect, but really solid. If you watch a lot of the stuff, he does a lot of very efficient deflection. He's good about disrupting punching lanes. He's good about like elbow blocking or shoulder rolling. And he's good about doing them small. Look, good footwork, good head movement, good defense. It's small because you don't need much. You know, the difference between the difference between missing and hitting is, I mean, how small do we want to measure? It doesn't matter if the other guy misses you by an inch or a mile. What matters is that he misses. And if you make him miss by a mile, then, well, are you in great position to counter? If you make him miss by an inch, you are. Almost every time. I can't quite use the absolute there, but almost. Rewatch this fight. Watch how Strickland deals with Adesanya's punches. One, he's doing a fair amount of hand fighting, just in open space. Not necessarily when he's jabbing, but Adesanya does keep his guard a little bit longer. So anytime Strickland gets to a range where he can kind of mess with it, he'll reach out and he'll grab. He'll hand fight, he'll wrist fight. And that will disrupt things. He's pretty good about shoulder rolling. He was ready for both stances. He was ready up and down with defense. So he's ready to block, parry, deflect, roll, check, cross check. He just had a really great defensive read on Adesanya. And, I mean, the numbers on this speak for themselves. Nobody else muted Israel Adesanya like this. I mean, just took away his offense. Didn't matter what he tried, he couldn't land anything. And that you can't win a fight if you can't land on somebody. I look, I'm not here to make excuses for anybody. I'm trying to figure out what happened, and occasionally when you try to figure stuff out, you wind up it winds up sounding like you're excusing it, or you're like, oh no, if not for X, then Y. Like that's kind of self-evident. But and yeah, Adesanya couldn't get his jab going. Um, Strickland just again deflected it, slipped it, was ready and willing to counter. Found a few good punches in awkward positions. He never got out over his skis, which is a big thing Adesanya tries to punish. You overcommit, he tends to get you. The only time Strickland did something that could be considered overcommitting was after he dropped him. And once he realized that wasn't going to be the finish, Strickland reset. Uh, I don't know how long Strickland's going to hold the belt. So a couple of other things here. So, what could Adesanya have done differently? I hate doing this because that dude could kill me. I don't make any I don't have any illusions about this. But what are some weapons that would be maybe more efficient? Um, I gotta get again linear stuff to the body to try and set up your other attacks. This is one of the ways that Pereira got. I don't know that this would go exactly the same way if they fought again, but watch that fight. Pereira, not only is Strickland, two things set this up. One, Strickland is just following Pereira. He's not cutting him off. If you just follow the other guy, that's a good way to get hurt. Pereira jabs him to the body so much that he starts reacting. He starts reaching to parry it. Well, he reads a body jab. Body jab doesn't come, but he reaches for it and then left hook drops him. Right? So, body work in general might have been more helpful. More linear attacks. Part of the problem with Strickland's defense, if you're Adesanya, right? He's disrupting all your linear attacks. So what do you do? Well, that means you have to go circular. I mean, the time he got dropped in the first, he was throwing a left hook. But there's okay, I have one of these. Allow me to introduce one of the contradictory sayings that is very martial arty. That I've told you guys this before. Like my base for training is American Kenpo. And the founder of American Kenpo, Ed Parker, had a had kind of a saying that went along with one of the concepts he developed, and it but he expressed it in the following way that lines beat circles and circles beat lines. Now, if you don't think about it, if you don't think about it in the right way, and not that's the right way, I'd say the right way because that means like, oh no, if you don't, it implies when I say don't think about it the right way. If you take that purely at face value, it sounds contradictory. It's the same, but it's the same logic. Uh, it's the same logical path that you follow with brawl a boxer, box a brawler. Because at face value, well, if you're the brawler, if you're trying to brawl the boxer, then by definition, the boxer is trying to box the brawler, so who's winning here, right? But it's about intent. It's about, what are you doing? If if you're dealing with an opponent who's throwing more circular attacks, straight lines. Or if they're moving in a circle, a straight line cuts them off, a straight line to intercept. If you're dealing with someone who's very linear, circle. If you're dealing with someone who's just walking at you, turn them. If you're dealing with someone who's got a very straight guard, circle around it. If you're dealing with someone who's doing a lot of straight line attacks, circular defense. Right? That's kind of, and saying it that, again, phrasing it as lines beat circles, circles beat lines, it, it seems zero sum. It's not. So what Strickland had going for him, once Adesanya decided, okay, I can't attack straight, I have to go circular, it opens up the linear attacks of Sean Strickland. how the concept is supposed to work a little bit in practice. So one of the things that, again, I hate second guessing people like this, but a bit more linear attacks, and are they getting disrupted? Yes, but Israel does a lot of headhunting. He does a lot of leg and then head work, and if you look at just the stats landed, he actually landed less to the head than the body. But if you look at his targeting, because again, the stat in question, I don't think it does. Yeah, this is landed by target, not attempted by target. So if we go by landed by target, Adesanya landed just 23% to the head, 40% to the body, 36% to the leg. But again, landed, not targeted. I'd be willing to bet he targeted the head and leg more than the body. He just landed more to the body. And the body work, again, the body work's an interesting thing. Because the big circular power shots, they lose value if you can't land them more consistently and if you can't land them in like quasi-damaging ways. Like if you hit somebody real hard to the body and they are conditioned for it and it's not seeming to slow them down or sap their cardio in any meaningful way, you have to go linear because it will help keep distance, which is last thing, because I mentioned Strickland's distance use. He had a real good ability to counter Adesanya's kicks, not necessarily with strikes, but if he'd hollow out away from a kick, right, withdraw the leg, create the concave space, Israel's kick goes through. When he returns to his stance, he's just like 2 inches closer. And being able to go from the very kind of like the latter part of kicking distance to inside where kicking is much more difficult, and almost even like crowding punch area. Like, look at his distance control in this one. It's really good and it's really interesting, especially for the guy on the front foot. He's constantly able to get to a spot where he's going to hang out, induce something, or Adesanya throws something. He either checks, avoids, or eats it and just decides to move in. Gets that other inch or two closer, and the entire dynamics of the exchange have changed. Again, by virtue of the real estate, by virtue of proximity, that changes everything. And once he got a little bit closer, Adesanya, he's good in the pocket, Adesanya is, but Strickland forced a lot of this to be at this weird, again, it's a very specific range. It's not, again, going from like the end of kicking range to not all the way into the pocket, which is, again, closer proximity, but like not even the end of boxing distance, but like middle boxing distance. And Adesanya was not terribly comfortable there. And some of that is Strickland's defense. Like, again, the Philly shell in MMA is weird because there's a bunch of stuff that it opens up. There's a handful of boxing guards that are more difficult for MMA just because of what they open up. The Philly shell's one of them. It'll work wonders if you know what you're doing. It'll protect your head pretty well. You're not as safe to the body, and you're especially not safe to the kidney, which the kidney is not a legal target in boxing. You are welcome to hit it all you want in MMA. So that can be a real problem. And if you've never been hit real hard in the kidney, it sucks. It's worse than a liver shot. They're rarer because reasons, but I would. What's the line I've heard about this before? I've used it here before. If getting hit in the liver is like getting hit in your soul, getting hit really hard in the kidney is like getting hit in your soul's groin. Like it's just the worst. And it's again, legal blow in MMA. Surprise. So that's what, and it's open when you use, again, kind of the Philly shell setup. The other thing that Philly's shell makes you a little bit more vulnerable to is some of the kicks. You can still deal with it, but it's a little bit so kicks are kind of an issue. The other thing it doesn't help as much. You might think it should, but if you're not a strong clincher, I would avoid it in MMA because you're basically giving up the opponent's left underhook with your right hand position, right? Your right hand is high, your left's low, so your left can get in there and you can get your own underhook and get inside position with that. But it's real hard to get your right down and into proper position in time. So you frequently will wind up in 50-50 clinches, and if you are not strong there, then you're not going to be 50-50 very long. I mean, takedowns is more about footwork in some respects, so and that's upper body position too. Like, that's a whole stuff that goes into. But if you want good examples of some of the Philly shell stuff and what it does, again, Mayweather's a good example. Dude, James Toney you got to get prime James Toney. You can't wait till he gets like fat and old. But if you watch the best of James Toney, he operates out of that a lot, and he operates out of that a lot in the pocket. Um, so it's one of those things that there's some stuff that is from some of the disparate elements of combat sports that make up MMA that's starting to filter into MMA. Some of them just take a bit of time to properly tune to not just the wide variety of things you have to consider, but your style, what you're doing with your opponent. I mean, do people use? I'm surprised it's not more cross guard in MMA. To be candid, cross guard or crab guard, the other thing it's called, because Poirier uses it sort of. He sort of uses it when he gets defensive. He's got what do they call like the hillbilly shoulder roll. Um, he does kind of like half cross guard. Was it Matt Burnell who used a lot of the cross guard? I think it was Matt Burnell. There's again, there's part of the reason people don't, I think, is because it's a little bit harder to deal with your hips getting attacked. But it opens up good elbow strikes, which is actually one of the other things I was surprised. Surprised no elbows from Adesanya, especially once Strickland got a little bit closer. If your punches are a little bit smothered, turn that sucker over, man. Especially another thing, like especially if you can't hit someone hard enough to get them off of you, change your punches to elbows and just cut them up. If you can't stop them with again the blunt force of your fist, put something harder. Your elbow's harder than your fist. Put that in the way of it. And you can't generate as much force because there's not as much time and length on the lever, but they're still they will still they'll ruin your night, man, if not longer. So let's talk a little bit about the title picture here. If I go on for a while about this fight, it's because there's not a lot about the rest of this card to talk a whole lot about, but we'll get to that. So yeah, Strickland, man, MMA is nuts. You have a guy here in Strickland who is just fundamentals. Some of them even you could argue not that great. Like again, footwork, some of it needs work. But he makes it work for him. He didn't do much in this fight other than pressure, cage cutting, really good defense, and a 1-2. He threw and a front kick. He threw like one or two left kind of body kicks, but mostly it was a front kick. He didn't clinch. He didn't knee. He didn't elbow. He didn't go for much of a takedown. Handful of good ideas and being incredibly well schooled for what Adesanya brings. This is kind of the big. It's not just Adesanya. This happens to everybody. The more you fight and the longer each of those fights goes, the more tape there is on you, the more people are going to figure you out. Adesanya had a massive lead on this division for a long time because his striking was different. His feinting game flummoxed people, and he was really good about weapons at different distances. He was good about locking you up with feints. He was good about chopping at you. He was good about annoying you and getting you to overcommit and then countering you. Like he had a giant lead, and people have kind of figured it out. You have if someone like me can pick up on a handful of things that Adesanya does reliably, people who know a lot more than me, especially MMA coaches, who look at the stuff a lot more than I do in a lot more detail than I do, are going to pick up on a lot more. And you just get to a point when your habits and your tactics become known, and you have to deal with that, or not, I suppose. But that we're kind of at that point with Adesanya. There's enough tape on him and enough very good guys, coaches and fighters have dealt with this problem. Eventually, man, that tree falls. Eventually, enough people taking enough swings of the axe, it falls. And credit to Strickland, credit to his coach. He trains out of Extreme Couture, so that's Eric Nixick. Dude, for just a second, can we appreciate Eric Nixick? That guy, I don't know if he's the head coach at Extreme Couture. He's the most public-facing one, so he's the one that travels with people more often than not. Like, I remember when Extreme Couture was one of the big MMA gyms, and I saw its fall from grace. And to see it now rise again in prominence, I mean, look at the guys that come out of there now. You had Francis. You look at the people who have gone there to try. No gym is necessarily going to be perfect fit for everybody, but that was a gym that had prominence, fell on hard times, and then rose back up. That's hard to do. It just is. So, a lot of credit to the coaching staff over there. Um, Now you've got, again, Strickland, Francis Ngannou, both the Basharat brothers train out of there, I think. Curtis Jackson. Um, Again, you can look up their roster if you're so inclined. There's a lot of good guys that come out of there now. And that's the product of dedication, hard work, and intelligent work. So, my hat's off to those guys. Dude, I think pretty highly of City Kickboxing as a general rule. They didn't have. Dude, what did they have for Sean Strickland? They didn't. It felt like they didn't have a specific idea for him, and once it was clear that he kind of had Izzy a little bit figured out, like they didn't have Plan B, and how it goes sometimes, I guess. So one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. I can't call it the. Well, hang on. If we're talking the numbers, there have been actually quite a few that have been potentially bigger upsets than this one. I think at close, Izzy was minus 675. That's what the UFC said. So almost 7-1 favorite. There have been bigger favorites that have lost, especially if we go like further down the card at different points in time. What was the hilarious one? Like Maria Agapova's second UFC fight, she was like minus 1200, something stupid, and then lost. But so let's talk title fights for a second. There have been bigger title fight upsets than what Strickland pulled here. Um, Let me just hit the big ones, right? Sarah over GSP, Holm over Rousey. I think numerically, Rousey was about as big might even have been a bigger favorite than um, Adesanya was here. Pena, I mentioned Pena, no, Pena over Nunez. Um, but I saw this phrase this way on Twitter, and I think this is maybe the better way to look at this. I think this is the biggest UFC title fight upset that did not end in a finish. Again, what do those ones have in common? Finishes. GSP got stopped by Matt Serra. Holmes' win was not a fluke, definitively not, but a finish. Nunez gassed badly, faded, got choked out, then avenged the loss, but finishes. Do you know how many monumental upsets there are at the UFC title fight level that are decisions? It's a lot rarer. Again, not impossible, but rarer. There's only two that I would put in the same conversation as this one. And believe it or not, if you weren't, I hate to phrase it this way because it sounds a bit, I don't know, elitist, gatekeepery, but you're going to have to take my word for this. If you weren't there live when, let me give you the, so if I put this one at the top, if I put Strickland decisioning Adesanya at the most shocking, like biggest upset via decision in a UFC title fight, and I do, for the record. I'll save number 2 for a second, but number 3 on that list for me is one of those that, again, depending on when you got into the sport, you may not appreciate it. When Frankie Edgar beat BJ Penn the first time. I don't know too many people who saw that one coming. Now, in fairness, their first fight is a somewhat disputed decision. I don't hate scoring it for Edgar, but there are some specific scorecards in that fight that are crap. I'm sorry, there was one judge who gave every round to Edgar, which is ridiculous. I think you can find 3 rounds for Frankie Edgar in that fight. But again, there were some bad scorecards that cast a pall over that. But if you didn't know, like if you weren't there when BJ Penn was at that point, dude, it's so hard to properly categorize BJ Penn at that point in time. And BJ became kind of a joke. And I hate that because it means you're less likely to consider what he did. His run at lightweight is one of the most ridiculously impressive things you'll ever see. Returns to that division, massacres Joe Stevenson. One of the bloodiest fights you'll ever see. Not the bloodiest, but it's up there, man. Cuts him open, gets him in a choke, and is choking him so hard that like the cut on his forehead like starts spewing harder. Like real pressure on that choke. Just again massacred him. Fought Sean Strickland after that and obliterated him. Jeez, who was too long after that? Was it Kenny Florian next? Florian didn't have anything for him. He beat the crap out of Diego Sanchez. Dude, he hit Diego Sanchez with a head kick. That opened up this horrible cut on Sanchez. Looked like he'd been hit with an axe. I mean, one of the worst cuts. That like again, Stevenson fight was bloodier. The cut he opened up on Diego Sanchez, one of the like, it's a horrible cut. It's just he was impossible to take down. He was impossible to control. You couldn't really outstrike him. He had a slick jab. He had power. If you could hit him, you couldn't hurt him. He couldn't be cut. He was a mythic figure. And Frankie Edgar beat him. Now, and again, that first fight disputed. Rematch was not. Frankie won that rematch clean. And the less said about their third fight, the better. But if you weren't there live, you don't appreciate it. That was a massive, massive performance and upset from Frankie Edgar. Now we look back on it and go, yeah, Frankie Edgar's it's like freaking Frankie Edgar. Like, of course. But, dude, if you weren't there, man, this undersized lightweight taking on this unstoppable force of nature in that division and doing what he did. Huge. Number 2 on this list. Now, this would have been number 1 prior to 293. Another one you don't, if you weren't there, man, that it's one of those moments that if you weren't present for it, can never fully be recaptured. But Randy Couture coming out of retirement to beat Tim Sylvia 50-45 across the boards Nowadays, that first round might be 10-8. It was. Look, there was a lot of apathy and antipathy for Tim Sylvia at that point. He was coming off of. He was either coming off of the third fight with Andrei Arlovsky or his title defense against Jeff Munson. I don't remember which. Both of which are terrible fights, by the way. Just terrible fights. Um, but people weren't liking Tim Sylvia, but Randy Couture was old. He was, again, coming out of retirement after. He retired after the third fight with Chuck Liddell, I think, if memory serves. When Chuck had knocked him out twice. Been stopped twice in his last, like, 3 fights. And he's going to fight this, 6'8". Whatever that. What was Tim? Tim Sylvia's a giant. I want to say it was 6'8". Or 6'9". Yeah, 6'8". This enormous man who, yeah, he had a couple of lackluster fights that people didn't like, but he could end your night, man. And Randy Couture comes out of retirement, and like 5 seconds into the first round, inside leg kick, overhand right, drops Sylvia, gets on his back, rides out the round, and just if never, you never would have predicted that. I know some people did. I'm aware of people who are like, yeah, Randy's got this. Don't know how, don't know why, just a feeling, and I don't like Sylvia. But to see that happen over 5 rounds, like, dude. Now again, we look back on this and go, yeah, Randy Couture, legend. No, that's why he's a legend. That's why he's a legend. I mean, he'd done great stuff before that. I mean, he was already a former champion at heavyweight and light heavyweight. Coming out of retirement and beating Tim Sylvia, like that was his moment of like that's his ascension. That's when he became that's when he went from a great fighter to an all-time legend. And this one, again, I don't know that I'm not trying to put Sean Strickland in the same category as Randy Couture. Their careers don't have that much in common, but if we're talking about like the moment, doing this to Adesanya over 5 rounds, I never would have guessed it. Never would have guessed. Before I move on to the state of the division, other thing I never would have guessed. So, as it, I'm going to use a word here that is now a slur, and I'm going to say it for the sake of clarity. So, if this is about to offend you, I apologize. I'm only going to say it once. But if you had a prop bet for UFC 293, and if I were setting this line, I would have put the over/under on fighters using the word. Apologies in advance if this offends anyone. I don't use this word in conversation. I'm using it for the sake of clarity here because saying the F word has a couple of different meanings. But if I would have set the over/under on fighters who use the word faggot, I apologize again, at 1.5, that's about where you set that, right? Like, okay, then you got a bunch of fighters here. You know, I'll set the over under 1.5. If you took the over on that with the rider that none of those instances of that word would come from Sean Strickland, my man, you got paid. Like tacking that rider onto it must have jumped your odds up astronomically, and he didn't use it. Two other fighters on this card did. We'll get to that later. But man, Demetrius Johnson said it right. People out here acting like it's the mid '90s again. And look, guys, we live in a world that does not deem that word acceptable in public conversation. I don't use it in private conversation either. But I'm like I grew up in the 90s. Okay, I don't give out my specific birthday here, but I'm closing in on 40. In certainly the latter half of my 30s. If you are of my age, you remember what junior high and high school were like. That word was everywhere in a bunch of its derivations. I don't pretend that it wasn't. I choose not to use it because, again, where we are with society. But, eh, I mean, there's a similar disconnect, I think, with that word and the N word, which I don't like even quoting, but that's kind of my point, isn't it? If you were born like 2010s or even like the late aughts, you probably have always thought of the six-letter F word as a slur that you don't like hearing and you may not even like quoting. That's my relationship, and I think people of my generation, that's our relationship with the N word. But if you go back another generation, like I've my father, my grandfather on each side, so again both grandfathers, I've never really heard them use that word. It's certainly in like public conversation or private, but I know that again their relationship with it was different, and it didn't. I know people that it doesn't bother to quote. I mean, for crying out loud, I host a podcast with Mark, and I love Mark. I mean, and part of this is because he grew up in Uniondale in the like early '80s when it was the hood. Like he grew up around a bunch of around a bunch of black people, and he doesn't have a problem quoting it. And I don't like quoting it because I don't know. And other people will feel that way about other things, but if I were to talk with my again, parents and I mean one of my grandfathers has passed on. It's been a while now. I still miss. But like, was that part of the general vernacular growing up in the areas that you grew up in? I have no doubt it would have been. That's just where the world was, and the question is, do you move with it or do you not? And in the case of some MMA fighters, apparently the answer is not. And I mean, I might. Do I want to give Cop half a pass because English is like his second or third language? It's he still could choose better. The other guy, there's no excuse. Like he's just trying to heal on the crowd. I know, but like, dude, be more creative. But yeah, again, no slurs coming out of Sean Strickland. Two other fighters did. Again, if you took that bet, you got paid, man, and I'm happy for you. So the state of middleweight is now awkward. Dana White at the post-fight presser said, "Yeah, rematch makes sense." It does not. Well, one, we don't do that, right, Dana? Right? We don't make fights the night of, right? Unless we do, of course. So let me give you my 2 cents on this. Izzy getting an immediate rematch with Alex Pereira made sense. It was his first loss at middleweight. He had a long history as champion. They had built-in history. And there wasn't really a ready-made number one contender, believe it or not. Um, there were some timing issues with like Whitaker, and we didn't know what was up with. Like, there was enough flux, and Izzy had enough wind at his back from his title reign that I think it was appropriate. It is not here. It just isn't. Sorry. He is 1-2 in his last 3 title fights. That's reality. I think he's only 4-3 in his last 7. Because you have the Blachowicz, Pereira, and now Strickland. Like, I am not saying Izzy is not a great fighter. I'm not saying he's washed. I'm not saying any of that. We're talking about, is an immediate rematch warranted? No. It's not. What about this fight makes you? This was not a weird stoppage. This is the other thing about how Strickland did this. This was not a bad judge's call. This was not an injury. This was not a cut. This was not a bad referee issue. This was nothing. It was a straight up 5-round fight, and Strickland clearly won 4 rounds. What's the case here for a rematch? There is not a meritocratic argument for it. Sorry, does not exist. I can tell you why the UFC wants to do that, and there's a couple of reasons. One, they're not happy with Dricus du Plessis not taking this fight. By the way, let me just brief aside here, because we're talking about the state of the division. The UFC being a little bit pissy at Dricus for not taking this fight. The man fought Robert Whittaker less than 2 months ago. You wanted like a 6-week turnaround from Bobby Knuckles to Izzy with all the wear and tear you'd already accumulated? No. I don't. That's ridiculous. That's it. That is absolutely ridiculous. But the UFC fighters, again, the UFC is not your friend. They care about their schedule. They do not care about you, and they never will. Understand that. So because he, again, for, health reasons or just turnaround or whatever it was, said, no, that's unreasonable and unrealistic, UFC got pissy and like, well, who knows who could be next? But look, there's heat on Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya. Dude, you brought him into that cage for a face-off. You didn't have to do that. You did, UFC, production-wise. Just what? You just assumed that a guy who went through a 6-week training camp and then fought Robert Whittaker would be ready for a 6-week turnaround to fight Adesanya? Do you know how stupid that is? But you wanted to keep your schedule. Now you blew it up. So, but again, there's heat on that fight. There's not heat for DDP and Strickland. So try to get the belt back on Izzy, then we can do the All Africa Showdown. I mean, that would have been historic. Right? That would have been, I think that would have been the first time in UFC title fight history you had 2 African-born fighters fighting each other. And I have to double check that one, but I feel okay saying that. And if I'm wrong, again, it's probably, what would make that wrong? Let's see. Usman never fought. Of course, there's, I don't know. I don't think Francis did. Let me double check Cyril Gahn. I'm 90% sure he's like Basque, from the Basque region. Yeah, yeah. He was born in La Roche-Lyon, which, yeah. So he's, again, native French. Yeah. It genuinely would have been. First time you had 2 native Africans fighting each other. And yes, DDP's a native African. He was born and raised in South Africa. Please spare me your nonsense. Would have been big. And you crapped all over it because you needed a title fight for this card, and Volkanovski's were still recovering from surgery. And yeah, your schedule, man. You are UFC is shooting itself in the foot over and over again. Neither here nor there. So they're gonna try for that. I think they're playing coy with this a little bit in the sense that, again, they're mad at du Plessis, so they're gonna try to screw him out of his rightful title shot, and he is the rightful #1 contender. Let's make no bones about that. The other fight coming up that's very relevant for the top of middleweight is Paulo Costa versus Khamzat Chimaev. The UFC likes Chimaev. if he just like blows the doors off of Paulo Costa, they might just slingshot him into the title. That's very possible. Dude, if he does that, what they might do is just Strickland and Chimaev and then book DDP and Adesanya as its own thing, which would be a crying shame in some respects. Look, man, I tend to think that when possible, you should err on the side of merit, which would be Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland next. And it's not like that's a bad fight. Again, it doesn't have the heat of Adesanya and DDP. I get that. But that's not a bad fight, and frankly, I like. Again, it's not a bad fight. I'm not going to discount Sean Strickland in that one, but I prefer DDP's chances, all things considered. Um, yeah, that's just. I mean, middleweight's just in a weird spot. It was in a weird spot even before this result. This result just compounds things. So, as for what's next for Izzy, here's the thing about this. So I've said that a lot this week. I'm gonna try at least the rest of the show. Adesanya debuted for the UFC in 2018 when he was 11-0. Now had 27 fights. So from 2018 debut, February, so a little over 5 years ago, 5.5 years. Close enough. Call it 5.5. In 5.5 years, he's had what? 15 fights? I'll just count. 1, 2, 3. 16, excuse me. 16 fights in 5.5 years. Guys, that is a crazy schedule. He fought what? Well, hang on. He fought 4 times. He fought 4 times in 18, 3 times in 19, twice in 20, twice in 21, 3 times in 2022, and now twice in 2023. One, appreciate that man's regularity. He's like clockwork almost. Second, dude, if you take a bit of time, no one's gonna blame you. No one who I mean, I don't know. The UFC might, because the UFC's pissy, but dude, take a bit. I think I heard Demetrius Johnson talk about this in his reaction, because he was watching it live and then recorded it, so it's on his YouTube channel. One of the other things he mentioned was, Adesanya, you know what you're dealing with. It might be very sophisticated, but you know what you're dealing with. So there's a bunch of stuff you should be doing and minding in the general scope of an MMA fight that you don't necessarily have to worry about with Izzy. And this has been true of a lot of fighters. It changes what you can do. And Adesanya's current game has kind of been figured out. He needs a wrinkle. And the fact that he has improved as much as he has while keeping that schedule up is remarkable. But, I mean, would anybody blame him if he took 8 months and just, worked on a couple of things, worked on his game? Don't worry about a fight, don't worry about prep, don't worry about tape study. Let's pick a couple of things here that we want to add or refine, and let's work on your overall MMA game, because we need something new here. We don't have to be drastic, but we need a new dimension. He might move up to 205. That's kind of been on the table for a while, so I don't know. The only thing I would like out of him, and I mean this for like his well-being and whatnot, dude, there's no rush. Figure it out. But you don't have to rush this. And for Strickland, again, DDP's the guy who's earned it, and I'm a big believer in rewarding that. So, but that remains to be seen. The UFC is going to UFC, so That was your main event. I talked for a long time about that, so let's move on. Heavyweight co-main event: Alexander Volkov defeats Tai Tuivasa via Ezekiel choke submission, 4:37 of the second. Technically, only the third man to hit an Ezekiel in the UFC. Everyone knows about Alexei Oleinik. Let me give a brief shout out to Remco Pardoel. Now, the caveat to Remco's Pardoel's pulling it off is that was way back in the day, and he was in a gi. Whereas Oleinik hit a couple of them no gi, and then of course Volkov here again no gi. Um, there's some interesting differences between the Ezekiel application gi and no gi. Because with the gi, there's a lot of sleeve grabbing that goes into it. You wrap one arm, for the sake of argument, let's say you're right, around the neck, because you're on top, right? Or they're on top, but you're face to face. Wrap an arm around the neck, then you would grab your own sleeve if you have a gi, and then your left arm kind of scissors under the chin against the neck, and then you again kind of you can use a scissor motion with your arms to apply pressure. It sucks. Doing it no gi is a little bit different. You have to, because again, there's no leverage, so you actually have to like figure four your arm. So instead of grabbing your gi, your own sleeve, to maintain that the bottom arm position and keep control of the head, you have to like grab your own bicep, and it's a bit more difficult. Doing it with a glove is even more difficult because it removes space. It makes it harder to get your hand across. Volkov mentioned that he learned this from years ago from Alexei Oleinik, and Oleinik actually has an interesting way of doing this in MMA. He doesn't extend the arm or the hand to try and get like the wrist and whatnot across the throat. He makes a fist and just pushes it against the side of your neck, against the carotid artery, and then pushes that in at the same time squeezing in with the other arm. I think squeezing with the other arm, but so he traps the other side of your neck against his bicep or his shoulder, and that applies some constriction there. Then the other side is just a fist with the glove against the side of your neck, and he's digging it into, and he's leveraging into you that way, and it will do the job. Um, Again, it compresses the relevant blood vessels. You'll go to sleep. And Volkov hit more that variation. He beat poor Tuivasa everywhere. His jab was working. His front kick was working. He was countering. Tuivasa landed some pretty good calf kicks. He didn't like those, but he started countering them later. Dropped him with a right hand. Then got on mount, and dude, Volkov doesn't have. And part of this because he's 6'7". Like wrestling when you're that big is difficult unless you're fighting someone literally, close to you in size. And I don't just mean weight. So Volkov's offensive takedowns are not anything to write home about. His takedown defense has improved, but if he gets on top of you, man, dude, his mount here was death. I mean, he was able to. I can't stress this enough, man. You need a serious size and length disparity to be able to, in full mount, grapevine the other guy's legs out and be able to posture up and get a little leverage into your strikes. Normally, if someone's on top of you and they grapevine your legs, they can't get leverage into their strikes. It's going to be arm punches. He's so long that he grapevined Tuivasa's legs and could still get posture. Oh, Um, look, Tuivasa has some good things to his game. He's strong, he's explosive, he's very quick. Tuivasa. He just badly needs a reset. Like, he was ranked above Volkov for this fight, which I thought was comical. Um, drop that guy down in competition. Let's let's reset this a little bit. There's still tools there that we can work with, but if you keep throwing him in there against the top 7, top 10 guys in that division, nothing's going to come of this. So I'd drop him down in class a little bit. Volkov wants to make one more run at the belt. You know what? Good for him. I don't know how much I like his chances, but I don't dislike Volkov. Um, he was landing nasty. Volkov's a good fighter. He's tall, he's long, he knows how to fight tall and long, he knows how to fight on the inside. He's been undone mostly by like Cyril Gane, who was just better at everything he was trying to do. Then Blades who wrestled him. I mean, look, he beat the crap out of Derek Lewis before Lewis scored that Hail Mary. I don't forget that. Oh, I don't know. He's also fought a lot of guys, and it means there's a lot of rematches potentially that aren't all that interesting. But good for him. And for Tuivasa, like, drop him down in class. Like, let's try to rehab this guy a little bit. He's 30, so he's still young. Let's try. There's time to fix this. Flyweight Manel Kopp defeated Felipe Dos Santos for unanimous decision, 130-27 to 29-28. This was your fight of the night? Yes, it was. Kopp, one of our slur slingers at the end. This was a really good fight. Look this one up if you didn't get a chance. It's good. Credit to Dos Santos, who took this fight on short notice, replacing Kai Kara France. Came in and fought his butt off. Great chin, man. Manel Kopp, once he dialed in, he was lighting him up, and Dos Santos never went down. Good chin, good pursuit of the fight. Tip of the cap, as a general rule here, to Felipe Dos Santos. Proved every bit that he's a UFC caliber fighter, so... Kopp looked like he normally does. Really sharp counter-striking, movement between stances. After the fight, he yelled at Kai Kara France, who again withdrew after he suffered a concussion a few weeks ago, and I don't blame him one iota for that. But he was in the crowd. They got into it at the press conference, and then he was in the crowd for this one. Got after it. Like, there's some heat there. That could main event a fight night very easily. I hope they try to rebook it. It was a good fight. Look, I get Kopp's frustration. Can we just take a second here on this one? Because he is... dude, he's still one of my front runners for worst luck of the year. I mean, this guy had first of all, his UFC debut got pushed back by 2 different canceled fights. His debut was a loss to Alexandre Pantoja, now the champion, a pretty good fight. He lost a close split decision to Matthews Nicolau. He missed weight when he beat Ode Osborne, but knocked him out in the first round. Knocked out Jalga Zumagulov. Then had 2 fights fall through. Finally got, which pretty much wasted his 2022. Like, he beats Zumagulov December of 21. Has a fight fall through in April, and then has another one fall through in June, before finally fighting a year later at December of 22. His 2023 had a fight with Alex Perez fall through, a fight with Davison Figueiredo fall through, and then this one fell through. Thankfully, he was able to stay on the card. This guy has had horrible luck in that respect. But yeah, him and Kai Kara France still down to see it. Was excited for that fight originally. Rebook it. Again, that's a fight night main event easily. Easily, easily, easily. The UFC won't do it because they hate flyweights. Our next 2 fights on the main card, Justin Tafa knocked out Austin Lane, 122 of the first. Crappy heavyweights. Light heavyweight Tyson Pedro knocked out Anton Turkalj with punches, 212 of the first. Crappy light heavyweights. Yeah, that was your main card. Look, I'm not saying it wasn't fun. I'm saying I don't know if it was worth the $80 price tag. For, again, 2 mediocre, quick finishes. Kopp and Dos Santos was fun. And then, look, Strickland beating Adesanya is one of those, like, it's historic. I don't say that lightly. That's a historic level upset. But apart from the moment, like, the fight isn't. if you're a nerd like me, then there's stuff to dissect. If you're an average fight fan, it's there. So like I said, it was a weak pay-per-view on paper, and we got some fun, but we didn't get like, I don't know. If I'd paid When I say if I'd paid for it, I am reimbursed for these. So when I say if I paid for it, I'm not like that's not me saying I steal them or pirate them. 4-1 is nice enough to reimburse me for expenses related to coverage. So I get reimbursed for pay-per-views. But like if I'd bought this on my own dime, um, I don't know if I would have felt like for Strickland and Adesanya, like I don't know, maybe, but again, I don't know. Like it wasn't a strong card. As for the prelims, Carlos Ulberg defeated Da Woon Jung via rear naked choke. This was originally ruled a decision. The referee missed the tap, and then apparently the choke kind of wasn't where it needed to be to really put him to sleep. So it went the last 11 seconds, and then but the replay caught the tap. It was announced that way. Fair play. Um, Ulberg looked pretty good here. I appreciate Jung's tenacity, but he struggled here, man. He got jabbed up a little bit. He wasn't able to close distance reliably. Just tough fight for him. Real tough fight. After the fight, Ulberg called out Dominic Reyes. I've seen people laughing about this, and I get why. We're all kind of like. Here's the thing if you're Ulberg. You're unranked. You're pretty good. And you want to call someone out who's likely to accept, will give you some recognition. And look, again, we can laugh about Dominic Reyes being on his terrible losing streak and being finished in his last like 3 fights. And I'm not saying that that's unfair even in some respects. His last 3? Yeah, it is. So, 4-fight losing streak, finished in his last 3. Blachowicz, Prochazka, and then Span. Again, we can laugh about this, but Reyes is kind of a name, and like, who else are you gonna call in this respect? Who else are you gonna call out? Again, you need someone who is beatable, realistic, and so what? We're gonna call it what? Alonzo Menafield or Dustin Jacoby? They're ranked below Reyes. He's actually calling someone ranked above them. Like, look, light heavyweight sucks. Why does the UFC's website still list Jamal Hill as champion? He is not. Hear that? Are they just in denial? Are they gonna wait to strip him until they can get a other title fight together? I don't know. That's just embarrassing. But Reyes is ranked 13th, and look, is it picking on a guy when he's down? Yeah, maybe, but this ain't the friend business, man. This is the hurt business. If Dominic Reyes is a wounded animal, everyone ranked below him who's trying to take his spot is going to try to kill him. That's how this works. So I'm not laughing at the guy for doing it. It's not an unreasonable call out. He's on a good enough winning streak to warrant a step up. And Reyes is probably more, if you're Ulberg, Reyes is probably more beatable than Jacoby or Menafield or Mirzakhanov. Or, I don't know, Roundtree? Ulberg style? Mm. So, look, again, we can laugh at it. We can, you can make fun of the guy, again, picking on somebody down on their luck. But if Reyes is still active and still ranked and still under contract, he's fair game. And it's on him to sort this out. So I'm not going to be one of the guys sitting here killing Ulberg for the call out. Featherweight. Ooh, this one. Chepe Mariscal defeated Jack Jenkins via arm injury, TKO / verbal submission. 3:19 of the second. Jenkins had a good first round. Landed some nasty calf kicks. He's a good boxer, good kicker. They had a pretty good scrap for a round. Second round, Mariscal makes it ugly. He makes it dirty. I don't mean unfair. I don't mean like cheating. Just makes it, kind of an ugly fight. Gets closer, clinches, dirty boxes, knees. Uh, Eventually ties up, and he goes for kind of a Uchimata, whizzer kick, whatever you want to call it. Jenkins, with his right arm, as they're going over, goes to post. And it's not that I'm not going to be one of those guys who says you can never post when you're going down, but you don't post with an extended arm, and your arm can be extended very easily if you mistime the distance, the angle you're coming down, the speed that you're coming down. Like, there's a bunch of stuff in here that makes that dangerous. Because if you post on a straight arm, your elbow will give, and not in the direction it's supposed to. That's why if you're gonna post, bent arm, very bent, so that your elbow will bend the direction it's supposed to. If you don't, it goes somewhere else. It goes somewhere it is not supposed to go. And there's a million examples of this. This happens in wrestling. This happens in judo. This happens in MMA. Just the latest one. And you can look this up if you're so inclined, if you don't mind the carnage. Look up, again, arm injuries off of these takedowns, and you'll see a bunch of MMA ones. So, there was one not too long. There was one very recently. There was that women's fight not that long ago where somebody tied up on a leg lock, and then the heck, I'm gonna have to look this up now because it's gonna bother me. Yeah, Estela Nunes. Estela Nunes and her fight with Victoria Dudakova. It just dislocated. Pretty badly. Yeah. And that was just again tying up off of there was a leg entanglement, and she was going down and just posted and straight arm happens. It's not uncommon. There's ways to avoid it. You have to be careful about it. Again, you have to keep that arm bent, man. You can't straighten it. Otherwise, the elbow will not go where it's supposed to. And that happened here. Hopefully Jenkins recovers. Martiscal, again, he had a rough first round, but like, that second round was going his way before the injury, and it wasn't a like freak accident. He was doing a technique, and legitimate win. So, again, hopefully both guys come back, because Jenkins has a fair amount of upside, and Mariscal's kind of started to come on. So, here to see what happens with both of them. Jamie Malarkey defeated John McDessie via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. I scored this for McDessie. Here's the thing. Round 1 to Malarkey, round 2 to McDessie. Round 3 was close enough to go either way. I liked McDessie's work more in the third round. A lot of people seem to, apart from the judges. I can't get up in arms over it. Look, we had a fight that came down to a third round. We had a fight that came down to a specific round that was close enough to make a case either way. I can't complain. I can't say anything. That's just how it goes. Um, what would have been fight of the night if not for Coppin Dos Santos? Lightweight, Nasrat Haqparast defeats Landon Quinones via unanimous decision 30-27 across the boards. Does not tell you the story of how close this was. Um, this was a close fight. This was very competitive. Um, this is the somewhat related to what I was talking about with bodywork and Adesanya and Strickland. Haqparast never gets close to really stopping Quinones with bodywork, but by the time the third round comes around, all that water in the basement, so to speak, is weighing him down. Like, he slows, and he slows in no small part because of bodywork. These just beat the crap out of each other. Was great. Really good fight. This would be the other one I'd say look up. Welterweight, Charlie Radke defeated Mike Mathetha, better known as Blood Diamond, via unanimous decision, 29-27 across the boards. Good old Blood Diamond got deducted a point in the third round for repeated low blows. Not a great fight. Don't have a whole lot to say here. Radke was our first on the night. Slinger of slurs, so fair enough. He apologized. He was trying to heal on the crowd. He misread things, and he just got punched in the face a lot. Like, I'd rather you didn't. But I'm not gonna get up in arms over this one. Like, I don't know. Maybe I should. Maybe I should, but I'm not going to. It's not that I don't think it was in good, like, it was in bad taste. I'd rather you didn't. And frankly, I'd rather the UFC had a better policy about this kind of thing. On the flip side, again, this is the hurt business. Fighters are going to say vile things to each other, or fans, or people they don't like. That's not new. You'd kind of rather you not do it on ESPN. It's on ESPN Plus. Yes, but point being, you'd rather that not happen, but the UFC doesn't really want, for a variety of reasons, doesn't want to impose something like that. And again, there's a variety of reasons. Catch weight because Shane Young missed weight by 5 pounds. Okay, not he weighed 149 and 3/4 for a featherweight fight. So call it 4 and change. Uh, Gabriel Miranda choked him out in 59 seconds. Um, yeah, kind of off balanced him, little bit of a knee tap, jumped on his back, rode him down, went with a face crank, slipped it under the neck, put him to sleep. Shane Young, I believe, now 0-4 since doing that haka at a face-off weigh-in thing. So, good win for Miranda, and kicking everything off, Kevin Jousset defeated Kiefer Crosby via rear naked choke, 4:49 of the first. Crosby having some success on the feet, a little bit back and forth. You had a slightly slower, more technical guy in Jousset, and then a bit more of a power-punching brawler in Crosby. But they tied up, and tying up with Jousset is not the greatest idea. He's a fairly significant judoka. And Crosby tried to throw. Jousset countered with ease, got his back, got his neck. Crosby did nothing right in defending that choke. I'm not trying to dump on the guy. He was he hung out too long on all fours, didn't recognize the position, didn't fight the hooks as they went in, didn't fight the hands, just textbook kind of freezing while the other guy gets you in checkmate. Something to work on for him in the future. But his striking didn't look terrible. Um, After the fight, Jusei called out Ian Gary. That ain't happening. Yeah, that was the card. Um, Not the worst night of fights in the world. A little bit weak for a pay-per-view, but again, capped off by that historic upset. Your fight of the night, I already mentioned Copp and Dos Santos. Performances of the night went to Sean Strickland and Justin Taffa. A lot of guys getting left out in the cold on that one. Because, dude, I would have given Volkov before I gave Taffa. Might have given Taffa would have been fairly far down the list for me if I was handing out those bonuses. But if you want my full report, MMAZona411mania.com, you know right where it is. So give that a read. Much appreciated. All right, that took a while. I apologize. We might be in for a long one here. I mean, you know that at this point rather than me. So let's move on. UFC Noche. This coming Saturday, September 16th. Also known as UFC on ESPN Plus 85, or UFC Fight Night 227, or UFC Fight Night Grasso versus Shevchenko 2. Happening on Mexican Independence Day. This poor card. It's still not a bad card. They got a fair amount of Mexican fighters here. But I look at some of the fights we were supposed to get here and I'm sad. Like, we were supposed to get Shavkat Rakhmonov and Kelvin Gastelum. We were supposed to get Chris Curtis and Anthony Hernandez. We were supposed to get Daniel Rodriguez and Santiago Ponzinibbio. Like, those are good fights. Dude, you throw those under a title fight, like that's a better pay-per-view card than the pay-per-view that we just came off of. It would be on free TV. Alas, we have what we have, which is still not terrible. So let's run through this, shall we? Main event. Rematch for the women's flyweight title. Alexa Grasso, your new champion, defending against Valentina Shevchenko, the woman she took the belt from. Tough one to call here. Um, Champions in immediate rematches tend to lose. Like, if you lose the belt and you get an immediate rematch, it actually statistically does not go your way. Adesanya actually bucked that trend when he beat Pereira. It doesn't happen very often statistically. So there's a little bit of that. We saw in how the first fight played out, Grasso was very well prepared for a lot of Shevchenko's habits. On the feet, she had a fair amount of success. Some of the grappling, like the grappling started going away from her down the stretch because both women are fond of the of the headlock. It didn't work for Shevchenko the first time. Grasso got on her back briefly. But as time wore on, Shevchenko's wrestling was starting to wear her down. Then Grasso just forced Shevchenko to a position where Shevchenko tends to throw spinning back kicks. And when she did, she immediately moved with her, rotated with her, got the back, got the choke. Very well schooled performance from Grasso. So, champions in rematches tend not to do well. Immediate rematches. There's that important caveat. Immediate rematches tends not to go best for them. But Shevchenko is still really good. Everywhere. Grasso is still very good. Like, this is a good fight. It was a pretty good fight the first time. Like everyone else, I picked Shevchenko there, but I took Grasso seriously. Heck, I took Tyler Santos seriously. So, a couple of things here. Shevchenko's getting up there a little bit in age. She's, what, 35? Recently 35. There's a lot of tape on her. I don't know how much she can undo some of her habits, especially some of the ones that Grasso was really keyed into. Shevchenko has been set as the favorite by the odds makers, which I understand. I don't think that's unfair. Absent that one mistake, who wins that first one, it's competitive, certainly. But things had started going Shevchenko's way. Pretty not like 10-8 material, but you knew where the momentum was. Um, oh man, again, it's tough. You're perfectly justified picking either way here. I'm gonna pick Grasso here. I might feel very stupid about this, but I don't know. I wonder if Shevchenko isn't gonna just move up in weight. Like women's bantamweight has no champion at the moment. It's a little bit empty. If the weight cut started to be a problem for Shevchenko, I'm not saying it is, I'm saying it might be. You marry that with, being a little bit older, having all that tape being available on you. I don't know. Look, she might win this fight. She very well might. This is a close fight on paper. It was close the first time. But there's some statistical stuff here that tends to go against the person in Shevchenko's position. I'm going to lean towards Grasso just a bit. She was having a lot of success on the feet, kind of getting inside kicking distance, landing pretty good jab. She got sharp hands. Um, yeah, I'm not going to be shocked one way or the other. There's not an outcome here that could shock me. Either woman could stop the other with strikes. Either woman could get a submission. Either woman could win a decision. Looking forward to the fight itself. I'm going to lean towards Grasso. Co-main event. Kevin Holland and Jack Della Maddalena. Good fight here. So, Jack Della Maddalena, coming off of a tough fight with Basil Hafez, he was supposed to fight somebody else. Who was he supposed to fight? Sean Brady. And then that fell apart. Hafez stepped up on short notice, fought him to a split decision. I didn't think it was split, but it was a tough fight. It was a very tough fight. Holland seems to be trying to turn a corner here. For a while, he was just. I mean, the man fought, what, 5 times in 2020? He was just kind of a Donald Cerrone type. Like, I'm gonna fight a lot, I'm gonna win some, I'm gonna lose some, but this is what I do. Last little bit, he's tried to fix that. Like, Khamzat Chimaev ran him over. Then the Stephen Thompson fight, like his corner stopped in between rounds fairly. You know, he had like he was all banged up. Like that was a fun enough fight. But the fights, his last 2 fights with Santiago Ponzinibbio and then Michael Chiesa, it seems like he's trying to turn the corner. We're gonna find out here because Jack Della is. I've been very, I've been very high on him for a little bit. You guys know that. These two are gonna be a little accommodating of each other. Um, the length and height going to Holland the way that it does makes me curious to see how JDM will deal with the range. He's a good body puncher. Takes a little bit too much damage, but, Holland lives on his chin a little bit too. I'm This is a good step up for JDM. It's not quite what Sean Brady would have. The Sean Brady fight was interesting because we think Brady might be on the decline, whereas JDM might be on the upswing, and that was going to be a kind of turning point for both guys. This isn't quite that for Holland. I don't think a loss here ruins him or like says something horrible about his trajectory. I don't even think a loss for JDM would be catastrophic. Wouldn't be great, but I don't think it would be catastrophic. I'm still gonna lean towards JDM here. Like I'm not quite at ride or die territory with him, but I think he's got decent cage craft. Holland's got a good chin, but I'm not sure about his body. I don't know. We're gonna see. Obviously we're gonna see. That's a good fight. I like the fight. I'm gonna lean towards JDM. Moving on, Raul Rosas Jr. will fight Terrence Mitchell. Rosas, who just got his first loss, dude. You brought an 18-year-old into the UFC. Like this isn't gonna go well. I mean, he got beat by a guy who's, not a scrub, but uh, I don't know. Look, they like Rosas, but I think they're soft touching him. They're soft touching him a bit here. So he's fighting Terrence Mitchell, who is 14-3. Lost his UFC debut to Cameron Simon. Because I think they're trying to play soft with Rosas, I'm going to lean towards him. He's 33. You know what? No, I'm going with Mitchell. I don't know. I, this is the thing about Rosas, right? He's so young, and his development could be screwed up so easily. I don't know what to expect from him. I'm gonna lean towards Mitchell. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm going with Rosas. I think they're trying to help him out. All right, moving on to lightweight Daniel Zellhuber and Christos Giagos. Zellhuber has had a couple of fights in the UFC. Yeah, he's 1-1. Lost his debut, then beat Lando Venata. Giagos is had a real up and down UFC. Yeah, he's 50-50 in the UFC at 6-6. Coming off a win though. In fact, yeah, he knocked out Ricky Glenn. There's losses. His UFC losses are Charles Oliveira, Drakkar Klose, Arman Saryukian, and Thiago Moises. He's got to have more losses than that. Okay, his first run in the UFC, he went 1-2, lost to Gilbert Burns. I can hold that against you in 2004 or in 2023 for that matter. The Chris Wade loss that sent him out of the promotion. Yeah, that's fair. But since returning, it's again Oliveira, champion, close, very darn good. Saryukian, very good. Moises ain't bad. I think I'm gonna lean towards Zellhuber still, but I'm not gonna be shocked if the Greek emerges over the Mexican. At featherweight, we have Fernando Padilla and Kyle Nelson. Nelson, quick look. He's had a rough go of it in the UFC. 2-4-1. I mean, he's had a rough. Some of these draws are rough. Like, you debut against Carlos Diego Ferreira. He fought Billy Quarantillo in there. Had that draw with Duho Choi. Superboy. Yeah, it was. That was his return fight for military service. Coming off a win over Blake Builder, though. I think this is Padilla. Been in the UFC before. He's 15-4, 1-0 in the UFC. Yeah, beat Julian Erosa. Yeah, picking Padilla. See, that's the main card. Prelims, we have Lupita Godinez, who now trains out of Canada, and Elise Reed. I am actually thinking Reed here. Reed's coming off that win over Jin Fry. Be your first UFC winning streak. I mean, Godinez, people like her. You don't have two-fight winning streak. Yeah, actually, I'm gonna be okay leaning towards Reed here, but only a little bit. Middleweight, good fight here actually. Roman Kopylov and Josh Fremd. Kopylov seems to be had a rough couple of first fights in the UFC. Carl Robertson and then Albert Duraev, but 3-0 since then. Knocked out Alessio Di Chirico, stopped Punahele Soriano, knocked out Claudio Ribeiro. It was a sick head kick. It was UFC 291, like second most memorable head kick from that card. Yeah, it unfortunately happened on the same card as Gaethje and Poirier, but it was a good head kick. It was a really good head kick. Fremd is fought in the UFC a couple of times. He's 2-2 in the UFC, yeah. Two-fight winning streak. Cedricus Dumas and then Jamie Pickett. He missed weight for that Pickett fight, though. Yeah, I'm going with Kopylov here. Then we have Edgar Chairez and Daniel Lacerda. We are at flyweight here. Chairez is 10-5, 0-1 in the UFC. Oh yeah, he fought Tatsuro Taira. It's a rough draw for your debut. Had a fight with Felipe Dos Santos fallout. Lacerda, 11-5, 0-4 in the UFC. Good grief. Yeah, Chairez. That's where the pick's going. Women's flyweight, Tracy Cortez and Jasmine Jasdavicius. Cortez been out for a while. She last fought in May of 2022. She had some kind of a medical issue. She was supposed to fight Amanda Hebos, and then yeah, that. Um, Jasdavicius coming off of a pretty good win actually. When she beat Miranda Maverick. That layoff. That's an issue. I'm still gonna lean towards Cortez, but if you're upset minded, if you don't mind betting the dog, like Jasdavicius is if she's the underdog, she's a live underdog. Then we have strawweights, Josephine Lindgren Knutson. Swedish, so Knutson. Knudsen is 6-0. Off a Contender Series win. She's facing Marek Mann. Marek? Marnik, excuse me. Small font, R on the end next to each other. Mann is 6-1, also making her promotional debut. Let me flip a coin here. I don't know, Mann, I guess. Then, what else do we have? We have Alex. Okay, I don't know where this is in the bout order, but I assume the prelims. Alex Reyes and Charlie Campbell. I'm gonna take a quick look at these two. Reyes is 13-3. Lost his UFC debut to Mike Perry. He's been out for. Jeez, what the heck happened to this guy? Okay, so Mike Perry knocked him out in 2017. He's had a bunch of fights. He's had 3 fights fall through since then, but he hasn't fought since. Okay, this will be exactly because it was the 16th of same month, right? It's exactly 6 years he'll be out of the cage. Dang. Yeah, in 18 he had a fight with Haqparast fall through. In 2023, he's had fights with Trevor Peek and Natan Levy. Levy was supposed to be on this card and wound up pulling out. That's a long layoff, man. I wonder what happened. I'm sure someone will tell us at some point on the cast. Campbell is 7-2. Fights out of Serra Longo. Or Longo and Weidman MMA. I forget what they call it these days. Making his UFC debut, I believe. Yeah. Yes, Campbell. I don't know though, man. Like that layoff, it's impossible to know for sure. No, I'm actually gonna lean towards Reyes. There's an experience gap there. That layoff though, man. Yeah. As a minor aside, to fights that we wound up losing from this card. So Lupita Godinez was supposed to fight Sam Hughes originally. It might actually be a better fight. We lost Chris Curtis and Anthony Hernandez. Already mentioned that. Rakhmonov and Gastelum. Oh, unfortunate. Cynthia Calvillo was supposed to fight Elise Reed. Calvillo had to pull out. That's how Reed and Godinez got together. I mentioned Rodriguez and Ponzinibbio. Mentioned Levy having falling out. I mentioned, okay, Kopylov stayed on the card, but I mentioned supposed to fight Anthony Hernandez. Yasmin Lucindo was supposed to fight on this card. This card originally in concept and on paper was actually really, really good. What we have is fine. I'm not dumping on this card. I'm lamenting what could have been. But Saturday, MMAZone411mania.com. Come by, say hello. I appreciate it. You can find me there. All right, let's move on then, shall we? And we'll get into news. I'll be fast through this, I promise. So, Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou had the press conference for their upcoming boxing match. Dude, Tyson Fury showing up out of shape. He's got time to get into shape for the fight, but that guy's mental health struggles are real, and his continued existence is for any of us dealing with various mental illnesses. Look, some of the gimmickry that he engages in aside, whether or not I agree with some of his career decision making at this point in time aside, genuinely, when you look at his struggles and what he's gone through and is going through and is still fighting through, like, and he's still there and he's still doing it. My hat's off to him. He is in the. I don't say this lightly, and I don't mean every aspect of his life, but the fact that he is doing what he's doing should be inspiring to every one of us dealing with mental illness of some variety or another. After he kind of asked, he said after during the press conference, he said, I'll fight you in a cage afterwards. Dude, you'd take 2 leg kicks and be done. I respect Tyson Fury as a boxer, but MMA is not boxing. Same way, like it's just not. But he mentioned that he mentioned a few other things. He got asked like, okay, so why aren't you trying to fight Alexander Usyk and get the undisputed title? And you can never take Tyson Fury at his word because he's almost always playing for the camera to one degree or another. But his response was like, why did I have I ever said I wanted that? I know I'm the best, but I'm not interested in that. Dude, if he can put yourself in Tyson Fury's shoes for just a second here. If you're offered the same amount of money to fight Francis Ngannou, powerful guy, but not a boxer, or Alexander Usyk, but the same amount of money, like one of these is a radically easier fight than the other. This, you know what? Let me throw this out there very briefly. A lot of us in the MMA space, when this kind of crossover thing started gaining traction, we kind of lamented how bad it was making MMA look. Like, because what do MMA UFC champions? The first thing they're doing now is calling out boxers. You could almost see a little bit of it when Usman was like, "I've cleaned out the division. I want a big payday. Let me go box Canelo." And like, yeah, it goes very, very bad for you. And Canelo didn't care one iota. But Sean O'Malley like wins the belt and then says, "Yeah, I want to go box Tank Davis." Like, piss off. Tank Davis would do bad, bad things to you, my man. Very bad. But it's common at this point. And we all kind of went, "Oh, this makes MMA look so bad," because, well, one, the pay structure is bad, and this is drawing attention to that. Two, it makes you look like like you don't know what you're doing when Tyron Woodley's out there getting knocked out by Jake Paul, or Anderson Silva gets dropped by Jake Paul, or Nate Diaz gets beat by Jake Paul. I reference Jake Paul a lot there, but it's not a great look for the sport. Well, it turns out it might be as bad for boxing, but in a wildly different way. You're presenting boxers with easier fights for comparable money to very difficult fights. Of course, they're going to take the easier fights. And some of this is, again, it's kind of disrupting the boxing architecture a little bit because you have people with outsized profiles relative to boxing coming in trying to generate interest, and boxers going, okay, you're giving me money. If I can put off fighting a guy who I'm going to have a really hard time with to fight a guy I'm not going to have a hard time with, guess what we're doing here? The Fury these days seems more interested in the big paycheck, high profile celebrity kind of stuff rather than unifying the heavyweight title. And one, I'm not blaming him. If he was out here saying, I want to be undisputed champion, and then backing off, and again, like he has said in the past, I'm going to fight Usyk, but if there had been like deliberate steps taken towards that end, and then he was backing out at the last minute, I might feel differently about it. Dude, if these guys were calling out Usyk, what do you? Okay, well, let's flip the script for just a second here. Okay, and Stipe Miocic says, "I want to box Alexander Usyk," and Usyk is then presented with the option: you can box Tyson Fury, or you can box Stipe Miocic, and your pay is going to be about the same. What do you think Usyk's doing? He's going to go school Miocic for however long that takes, get a fat paycheck, and not worry about it. That the incentive structure here is all monetary, for better or for worse, as a general rule, and boxers are now winding up presented with easier fights for comparable money to very difficult fights, of course they're taking the easier fights. Not that hard to understand. Frustrating as a fan, easy to understand. Okay. So there was that. I don't know what we're doing over there. Lot of Saudi Arabian propaganda is mostly what's going on over there. A lot of sports washing. All right, moving on. So we had some fight announcements come out. Let's take a quick look through some of these. Um, so October 14th, we have our main event for that card. It will be at the Apex. We know a good chunk of this card, actually. Main event at featherweight will be Sadiq Yusuff and Edson Barboza. Yeah, that's an iffy main event. Again, when you see the main event, you have to ask yourself, so that's your main event, what's below it? And here we've got, what do we got? Viviane Araújo and Jennifer Maia, that's not awful. Jonathan Martinez and Adrian Yanez, that's good. Dude, that's a good fight. That's actually a really good fight. David Dvorak and Tatsuro Taira. Taira taking another step up. Dvorak, who had some potential, he's up against it. I'm always going to pop for Ronnie Yaya out here still doing it. Don't care about Michel Pereira and not Marc-Andre Berrio. You know what? There's a handful of decent fights in there that are currently announced. But that's not a terribly strong main event. I think what that ultimately is going to be is just a really strong free streaming card. And you know what? I'll take that these days. Um, Also announced for November 18th, I may have touched on this last week, Brendan Allen and Paul Craig. We have a few other fights for that card now. Most notably, Jordan Levitt and Chase Hooper. Atman Azaitar's back. Kyung Ho Kong and John Castaneda. It's not a great card. That's not great. Look, I tell the truth here, right? Then, oh, what was it? Rather, where is it? Yeah, okay. So, UFC and ESPN Plus 87, October 7th. Our main event is Grant Dawson and Bobby Green. This is not a strong main event. Again, what's worse than that? That you're going to wind up on this card. You're going to spend, 6 hours watching, if you're me at least. You got Joe Pyfer, Drew Dober, Ricky Glenn isn't bad. Shannon Bilalgio, I don't care. Orichi Long and Johnny Munoz, meh. Hanako Murata and Vanessa Demopoulos, moderately interesting. Alex Morono and Joaquin Buckley might be fun. So, care about Montana De La Rosa and Stephanie Egger. Yuman Kutalaba and Felipe Lins is going to be meh. Nate Manis and Matthews Mendonce, excuse me. Loosely curious about Daniel Pineda. Hussein Askaba, Again, it's not a terribly strong card. Gotta call a spade a spade. That's where we are. Were there any others announced? I may not have touched on this earlier, but we do know November 4th. They're in Sao Paulo. Main event of Curtis Blades and Jailton Almeida. Good fight for the heavyweight division. What else is on that card? Angela Hill. Rinat Fakhretdinov against Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. That'll be something. Alpha Vieira and Armin Petrosian in final clash. Kyle Bahalio's fighting. Ooh, he's fighting Nursultan Ruzboyev. Probably Bahalio, but if you're, don't I use, I tend to pick Russians to beat Brazilians, especially in Brazil, because it amuses me to do so. Bahalio is generally the more proven guy there, but Nursultan Ruzboyev, he might upset a few people there. It's an outside chance, but it's not crazy. So we know a few fights there, so that's kind of the state of things at the moment. A few of those fight nights look, if I weren't covering them, I probably wouldn't really watch. Certainly not live and dedicate as much time to it, but what are you gonna do? Your job is your job, right? All right. Let's move on. I'll try to be brief with this one, but Dana White got asked very briefly, um, about the PFL and the PFL entering into a deal with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Saudi government arm that deals with this stuff, invested a ton of money into them. Dana got asked about that, and he said, "I don't care. It doesn't matter how much money you have. We have a monopoly, more or less." And like the same guy kind of asked, like, so any thoughts to what they might get from buying Bellator? And his response was just, who in God's green earth would want to buy Bellator? My man, your lawyers must be throwing themselves off of buildings. Consider what you just admitted publicly. Okay? Think about this for just a second. You're being sued for unfair business practices, antitrust violations, and again, being a monopsony, which is loosely adjacent to a monopoly and is again illegal. You're being accused of this. The judge has indicated he thinks that's what's going on here. You're banking at this point legally on the Ninth Circuit hearing your appeal about class certification because everything else has been thrown out. This is what you're banking on. And hoping that, a letter of recommendation, a letter from like the Las Vegas Board of Tourism or Chamber of Commerce or whatever, to the Ninth Circuit, like, please, we like the UFC and all the money they bring in. Who cares if they're operating unfair business practices and screwing fighters over? We'd like the revenue they generate. You're gambling on this. Like this is it. Because if the Ninth Circuit either rejects your appeal or hears it and then rules against you, either way, you are stuck going to trial against a judge whose rulings to this point have not been in your favor, in some cases with very damning language. And you're out here publicly in front of the media saying, we don't care about our competition. It doesn't matter how much money they have. You'll never make a dent in what we do. Think for just a minute about what you admitted to on the record, publicly, that your business is so ironclad, dominant in the marketplace that it does not matter how much money is thrown at it. You've just admitted to half of the complaints being filed against you in court. This is why people in something equivalent to Dana White's position in other sports leagues don't sound like him. It's not by accident. You think, look, we can all joke about NBA commissioners or NFL commissioners till the cows come home. You think they don't have opinions? You think they're not capable of flying off the handle some of the ways Dana White has? Of course they are. They know how to keep it in check because they're aware of their exposure and liability. I Ugh, I just I don't know what to I don't know. It's You know what I'm going to say about this. You're basically admitting to everything you're being sued over. Job. All right. That's all I've got here. Let me check Twitter, see if anything crazy's broken. If not, we'll do plugs and get out of here. And I appreciate you sticking with me for over 2 hours now. I hope you've broken this up into chunks, or I've been able to be a companion while you're stuck in traffic. Or I just put your kids to sleep. I don't know. Whatever you use this for after I put it out onto the internet, I don't know. I don't want to know. There's some sick people out there, and I'd rather not have weirdness in my head any more than already exists. So, let me check Twitter, and if not, we're out of here. All right. Nope. So, plugs. Usual spate of coverage. MLW stuff on Thursday. WWE SmackDown on Friday. UFC event on Saturday. Damn You Hollywood is mostly. Look, man, it's September. We're kind of on hiatus until the end of September with the Expendables 4. There's just nothing really coming out worth talking about. So, yeah, there's other stuff coming out as a general rule, but that's it for me podcasting. in some respects. So, what do we got? Yeah, I think that's it. All right, back here next week to review UFC Noche and to preview. Yes, we will be previewing UFC on ESPN Plus 86. Zia versus Gamrot. Darn good fight. What else is on that card? Javid Basharat. Bryce Mitchell and Dan Ige is not bad. Charles Jordan and Ricardo Ramos. Haynes and Andre Fialho. You know what? It's not a terrible card. For your standard fight night stuff. Yeah, you know what? I'll stick with it. It's not terrible. That is not a terrible card. All right, I'll be back with that on the horizon. Thank you all very, very much as always. You know the drill. Stay safe out there. Appreciate each and every one of you. While you're at it, don't forget to be well, be safe, and behave.